This is a new slide I just did for autism risk factors. It's for a paper that came out last year by Dr. Martin Pall. And I think that's actually one of the most impressive autism papers. I've waited about 8 years for him to write the paper about autism and EMF. And he really did a nice job looking at multiple factors. So he's looking at, certainly he looked at genetics, but he also looked at metabolic factors. So some of the metabolic factors were elevated homocysteine, elevated inflammatory factors, depleted magnesium, and depleted BH4, and then in a couple other metabolic factors as well. But then he's listing some drug interactions as well. And so what the goal is, Dr. Paul really narrowed it down and said, I think that the key element here with autism is intracellular calcium. So all of these factors together elevate intracellular calcium. And on the next slide, we'll talk about, I'll show you a little bit more of the details of that. So these are all the high level factors. When we look at total load, we have drug interactions, potentially some, we've heard a lot about Tylenol or acetaminophen, but there are some antibiotics that raise intracellular calcium. There are clearly toxic metals, sometimes in vaccines, the aluminum, the mercury. There are toxic chemicals like VOCs, glyphosate, and PCBs that elevate intracellular calcium. And we have pesticide, four categories of pesticides as well, and packaging and plastics. So the PFAS, the Teflon from the movie we talked about, The Devil We Know, BPA and phthalates, what's common, and then of course the EMF that we'll get into, and we'll get into electric fields, magnetic fields, wireless, and dirty electricity. All of those factors raise intracellular calcium. And calcium, one of the key genetic risk factors in autism and Timothy syndrome specifically, was a calcium channel variation. So that really helps us focus. We do have a ton of genetic influences. We have a ton of environmental influences, but this gives us a little bit of focus. And so that it's not just avoid all chemicals, avoid all whatever, but this lets us focus a little bit. So let's talk a little bit more about the mechanisms. So let's pretend like this is a very simplified model. This is a cell. Actually, even better is pretend like this is a neuron. So normally we have a ratio of 10,000 to 1 calcium ions on the inside versus the outside. So the inside, this is the largest ion gradient in the body. And so it's almost like a dark room. The inside of the cell doesn't have a lot of calcium. And when a calcium ion comes in, it's an excite signal. It kind of says, hey, wake up, something important is happening. So this is like, hey, this is a lion is chasing you, or something could be positive. I'm about to perform. I'm about to give a talk. I'm about to meet an important person. So excite, get the body, make sure you're not undertuned, and make sure you're kind of like ramped up for performance. So that's what this signal is. And it comes through the channel that allows the calcium to get through is gated by voltage. So that's what actually changes. That's what allows the calcium to get in when there's more voltage. So, or more of a electric field. So there are genetic variations in these channels, like we just talked about. And some of these channels can be tuned. The calcium channels can be tuned by mineral levels and by toxins. So they have a Midas receptor, metal ion dependent adhesion site, that can tune the calcium channels. Okay, now, so the calcium goes in through that channel. Now, the cell membrane has its own voltage and a lipid layer on the outside and these vibrational receptors. And also that can respond to anytime there's like a stealing of electrons, as Dr. Navio would say when he talks about cell danger mode, he talks about electron stealers. So multiple things can steal electrons. We have toxins, we have infections, but we can also have electrical impacts as well. And so we can have a polarized waveform. So that's what man-made radiation is, a polarized waveform. And so that's a symbol of a polarized waveform coming through like a blade, not like diffuse light, like sunlight, and natural fields, but kind of like a blade. So that force, and it's oscillating back and forth, and it can interfere with these voltage-gated calcium channels. So, and it'll oxidize the outside layer, and the cell membrane will get thicker, and that's how the cell will go. It create like a fortress mode. It goes into like a cell danger mode, a protective mode. And then that can actually bring in more calcium. That can actually bring in more ions when the cell membrane like this is thinner like this, it's actually even more susceptible to EMF. So we can actually get what we call like false calcium channel signaling. It's like a false excite signal. And it can raise peroxynitrite, which is a nasty free radical. And it then creates oxidative damage, and potentially even mitochondrial damage, DNA damage. And this is called excitotoxicity. So we want, I think most people would be familiar with this sensation. This is if you've had too much coffee. Calcium ions are released from the endoplasmic reticulum inside the cell, and that raises intracellular calcium. So it comes in, it's a different mechanism, but that's the same feeling that you'll get, this kind of agitated, overwired feeling. And as we said, chemicals can do this as well. So chemicals like glutamate, there's a glutamate receptor called MDMA that can allow calcium to get in as well. And I think the most common thing here would be MSG. So I think if you've ever had monosodium glutamate, or if you've had a child who has a bad reaction to MSG, high glutamate foods, that's that same kind of edgy feeling that you'll get. So what Dr. Paul talked about in his paper that he talks about 12 categories of excitotoxic chemicals. So it's really helpful actually, because I used to think, oh my gosh, we've got all these chemical exposures, we've got 80,000 chemicals in commerce, but he's really kind of narrowed it down and said, let's just focus on this pathway, calcium, and actually I think he's got 15 excitotoxic chemicals listed in his paper, but there were different categories and whatever. But it helps us really narrow things down. And because it gets very overwhelming as